She said I was just a placeholder until someone worthy came along. Those were the exact words my sister-in-law whispered to Logan when she thought I wasn't within earshot. But I was. I heard every syllable, and something inside me shattered. My name is Natalie Quinn. I'm 30 years old, and I've been married to Logan Carter for almost 3 years. I wish I could say those years were filled with love and laughter, but truthfully, they've been a slow, painful erosion of my self-worth. One Sunday brunch at a time. When I first met Logan, he wasn't the man in the designer suits or the Carter air everyone knows today. He was just a charming, nerdy guy working at a tech startup, struggling to prove himself outside his family's long shadow. I fell in love with that man, the one who stayed up until 2 a.m., helping me brainstorm event ideas for my struggling wedding planning business, the one who made grocery store sushi feel like fine dining. But after we got married, the shadows crept back in. And the biggest, coldest shadow of all came in the form of his older sister, Vivian Carter. Vivian wasn't just a high-powered executive. She was the face of the Carter legacy. Her word was gospel, and unfortunately for me, her word was that I didn't belong. It started subtly. Invitations to family events that somehow got lost. Group photos where I was asked to step aside to take one just with the family. Little comments like, "Oh, Natalie, you wouldn't understand. This is old money talk." I bit my tongue for Logan. I smiled through the humiliation. I told myself it would get better. It didn't. Vivian began hosting what she called the Carter Inner Circle Brunch every Sunday at their estate. Only direct family and approved partners were invited. Spoiler alert, I was never on that list. I found out from Logan the first time. He came out of the shower, towel around his waist, and casually said, "Babe, I won't be home for lunch. Viv wants just the family this week." I laughed at first, waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one. "You're not serious," I said. He winced. "She's particular. She thinks the brunches are for family only." "I am family." "I know. But you know how Vivian is. It's just easier not to rock the boat." Easier for him, maybe. But for me, it was like being erased. Week after week, Logan would dress in his finest, kiss me on the forehead, and disappear into that mansion, leaving me with takeout and a bottomless pit of rejection. Still, I tried. I showed up to family birthdays with handmade gifts. I remembered anniversaries. I laughed at their terrible jokes. And every time, Vivian would remind me, with a look or a comment, that I was still just a guest in their world. But nothing prepared me for what I overheard last Sunday. I had driven to the estate to drop off a monogrammed photo album I'd made for Logan's parents' anniversary. I wasn't planning to stay. I wasn't invited, after all. But as I walked past the rose garden, I heard Vivian's voice drift through the hedges. "She's temporary," she said. "Just a warm-up act. Once Logan comes to his senses, he'll marry someone real, someone with legacy." I froze. "And the best part?" she added, laughing softly. "She actually thinks being his wife means something." I dropped the album. They didn't hear it, but it didn't matter. I turned and walked back to my car, every step heavier than the last. By the time I made it home, I couldn't even cry. I just stared at my reflection, wondering how I let it get this far, how I became a guest in my own life. Logan came home late that night, smelling like wine and expensive cologne. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I was choking on betrayal and silence. But something inside me had changed. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. Real, rising, righteous anger. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was this. I was done being quiet. I was done being erased. And I was done letting Vivian write my story for me. What I didn't expect was that someone else had been watching from the sidelines too, and he was about to change everything. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of what Vivian said. Well, not entirely. I'd lived with her words digging under my skin for years. But this time, something else was buzzing in the back of my mind. That final line I'd written in my journal right before collapsing into bed. What I didn't expect was that someone else had been watching from the sidelines too. And I meant it, because the very next morning, someone showed up at my door. I was in leggings and an oversized sweatshirt, still bleary-eyed from a night of pacing and overthinking, when the doorbell rang. I expected a neighbor, a package. Maybe Logan had forgotten his keys. But when I opened the door, I froze. There stood a man in his early 60s, tall, impeccably dressed in a slate gray coat. Salt and pepper hair neatly combed back, sharp steel gray eyes. But there was something softer in his expression, like he was holding on to something fragile. "Natalie Quinn?" he asked, voice low but steady. "Yes?" He took a deep breath, then extended a hand. "My name is Ambrose Vale." The name didn't mean anything to me at first, but then he said it. "I'm your father," I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "I know this is a lot," he said gently, lowering his hand. "But I've been looking for you for a long time." My heart was pounding. There must be some mistake. He shook his head. "Your mother was Evelyn Quinn. She passed away when you were 14, correct?" "Yes, but—" "She never told you about me. I suspected she wouldn't." I was speechless. I'd grown up believing my father had died in a car crash before I was born. That's what my mom told everyone. That's what I believed. That's what I grieved. Ambrose sighed. "Your mother was protecting you, and maybe, in some way, protecting me too." My knees gave out, and I sat down on the stairs inside the doorway. He didn't come in, just stood there like a man who knew he had no right to. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Why show up after 30 years?" "Because I didn't know where you were until recently. And when I found out who you'd married, I couldn't stay away." I looked up. "Logan?" He nodded. "And, more importantly, Vivian Carter." Something dark flickered in his eyes when he said her name. I could feel the tension shift. "You know her?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he slid a folded photo. He handed it to me carefully, like it might break. In it, I saw a much younger version of Ambrose, smiling with his arm around a radiant young woman. It was my mom, Evelyn. She looked happy, alive in a way I'd never seen her before. "We were engaged," he said quietly, "until Vivian Carter destroyed everything." That snapped my gaze back to him. "What?" "She wanted what we had. Or rather, she wanted what I had. My company, my connections. I was building a small tech firm that was gaining traction. She saw it as a threat to her family's dominance. So she intervened." My voice came out in a whisper. "How?" "She seduced me, or tried. I rejected her. The next week, I was accused of financial misconduct. Investors pulled out overnight. I lost everything, my business, my reputation, and eventually, your mother." I stared at the photo in my hands, trying to piece together a past I never knew I had. "Your mother and I tried to rebuild, but she was scared. Said Vivian had too much power, too many connections. She made me promise to disappear, for both your sakes." Tears welled in my eyes. "And now?" "I kept my distance all these years. But when I saw Vivian treating you the way she treated Evelyn, I couldn't stay silent." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You came here to protect me?" He nodded. "And maybe to make things right." It was too much, too fast. I didn't even know if I believed him yet. But one thing was clear. Vivian had been playing this game for decades, and I was the next piece on her board. Before I could speak again, my phone buzzed. A message from Logan. "We need to talk. Viv says you've been spreading lies about her. She's furious." I showed the message to Ambrose. He read it, exhaled slowly, then looked me dead in the eye. "I think it's time we show her what truth really looks like." I didn't tell Logan about Ambrose, not yet. After the message he sent, defending Vivian and accusing me of spreading lies, I needed space. Space to breathe, to think, to figure out who I could trust, if anyone. Ambrose, on the other hand, wasted no time. Within days, he had assembled a plan, a very public one. "There's a gala this weekend," he said over coffee, tapping a sleek black folder in front of him. "The Carter Centennial, 100 years of Carter legacy, Vivian's crowning moment." I frowned. "She's being honored, isn't she?" "Exactly. Media, investors, city officials, all watching, all listening." I stared at him. "You want to go?" "No," he said. "We are going." Every instinct in me screamed no. I didn't belong in that world, and Vivian had made that painfully clear for years. But Ambrose leaned forward, voice steady. "She built an empire by stepping on people like your mother, and now you. It's time someone pulled the curtain back." That was the first time I didn't hesitate. The night of the gala, Ambrose sent a car and a dress. When I stepped into that emerald silk gown, I barely recognized myself. I wasn't the invisible wife anymore. I wasn't a placeholder. I was a storm. The venue was pure opulence. Chandeliers, velvet, champagne in every hand. The Carter name was etched into every marble pillar. And Vivienne? She floated through the room like a queen, accepting compliments, kissing cheeks, basking in the spotlight, until she saw me. Her eyes locked on mine like a hawk spotting prey. Her smile didn't waver, but her grip on her glass tightened. "Natalie," she said, voice sugary sweet. "What an unexpected surprise." "I'm full of them," I replied. She turned to Logan, who had just spotted me. His jaw dropped, then clenched. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "I figured I wasn't invited." He shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't the place for drama." I smiled coldly. "Then maybe you should have picked a different family." Before he could reply, a hush fell over the ballroom. The lights dimmed slightly as a spotlight lit the stage. The announcer's voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest of honor, Vivian Carter." Thunderous applause. She walked up, flawless and glowing, her speech clutched in manicured hands. She was 5 sentences in, something about legacy and resilience, when the lights flickered. A murmur rippled through the room. Then the giant screen behind her lit up. A video. At first, just static. Then, audio. Vivian's voice. "I don't care how loyal she is. Natalie's disposable. Once Logan remarries someone with pedigree, we'll rebrand her out of existence." Gasps echoed. The video continued. Clipped recordings of private conversations. Her mocking my mother's background. Laughing about how easy it was to manipulate Logan. Even worse, joking about sabotaging my event planning business by blacklisting me from Carter-affiliated venues. I turned to see her frozen on stage, pale as marble. Her speech slipped from her hand. The room had gone silent. No one clapped. No one smiled. And then, a new voice came over the speakers. Ambrose. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption. My name is Ambrose Vale. Some of you may remember me. Many of you benefited from my investments. I'm here tonight not as a disruptor, but as a father." The crowd turned as Ambrose walked toward the stage, calm and composed, stopping just beneath Vivian. "This is my daughter, Natalie Quinn, and the woman standing above me tried to erase both of us from existence." Vivian whispered something to a security guard, but no one moved. They were too stunned. "I built this company's original software backbone," Ambrose continued. "I was pushed out, destroyed, slandered. Tonight, I return not for revenge, but to show what truth looks like when it refuses to stay buried." And then, he clicked a remote. The screen changed. Legal documents, old partnership agreements, emails, transaction logs. Proof that Ambrose had been one of the silent architects of Carter Enterprises from the very beginning, before Vivian's name was even on a plaque. And then came the final blow. An image of a check, issued 3 years ago. To me, from Vivian Carter, $50,000. Memo line, settlement, keep her quiet. My breath caught. I had never seen that check before, but the name on the endorsement line, was my mother's. The room exploded with whispers. I felt my knees weaken. Ambrose turned to me, voice low. She took everything from your mother, Natalie, but she couldn't silence the past forever. I looked up at Vivian. Her hands trembled. Her mask had cracked. But I wasn't finished yet. Comment the number 3 if you want to see how Vivian will pay for this. I always thought revenge would feel like fire. Burning, raging, impossible to control. But in that moment, standing in the center of a ballroom that had just witnessed Vivian Carter's mask shatter, it didn't feel like fire at all. It felt like silence, like the exact second before a storm hits, because this wasn't the end. It was just the strike of the match. After the gala, Vivian disappeared for 2 days. No statements, no damage control, nothing, which for her was terrifying in itself. The media tore her apart. Investors panicked. Board members held emergency meetings. And I waited until she crawled out of hiding. On the 3rd morning, I got a private message. We need to talk. No lawyers, no media, just us. Vivian Ambrose said I didn't have to go, that I'd already won. But I wasn't looking for a win. I wanted the truth, the whole thing. So I said yes. We met at the Carter estate, not in the grand dining room or the marble-tiled lobby, but in Vivian's private office, the one filled with portraits of her and Logan, carefully staged press clippings, and shelves lined with awards she probably had made for herself. She didn't rise when I entered, just gestured to the chair across from her. You've made your point, she said, voice sharp but low. Have I? I replied. Her eyes flashed. You humiliated me. I leaned in. You made me feel invisible, for years. You erased my mother. You tried to erase me. Vivian scoffed. Oh, spare me the self-righteous act. Your mother was an opportunist. She clung to Ambrose like a lifeline. She loved him, and he loved her. The only opportunist in this story is the woman who sold him out to keep her precious empire intact. She slammed her hand on the desk. You don't understand what it takes to survive in this world. You think respect is given? It's taken, and I did what I had to do. And now, I said quietly, you're going to lose everything because of it. That got her attention. She leaned back, studying me. You think you've won, because you showed a few clips and waved around a check? This world forgets quickly, Natalie. One bad headline doesn't end me. I didn't blink. It's not just a headline anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black folder. Her eyes narrowed. Inside were the signed whistleblower documents. Vivian's name was on at least 4 offshore accounts. Accounts linked to shell companies Carter Enterprises had supposedly cut ties with years ago. The money trail was airtight. The audit had been launched quietly 2 weeks before the gala. By Ambrose. Vivian's face went sheet white. I've already submitted the evidence, I said, and before you try to deny it, you should know the head of the audit committee is someone you personally blackballed 10 years ago. She's eager. Vivian opened her mouth, but no words came out. I stood. For the record, this isn't revenge, I said softly. This is accountability. As I walked out, she didn't follow. Later that day, Logan showed up at my apartment, disheveled, desperate, a man whose world was imploding. I didn't know, he said. I swear. About the accounts, the money, none of it. I didn't respond. He stepped closer. Please, Nat, let's just start over. We can fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the boy I once loved. But I also saw the man who sat silently every time his sister humiliated me, who watched me cry myself to sleep and still went to brunch. I already did, I said, then gently closed the door. That night, Ambrose called. His voice was steady. You need to see something. He sent a file, confidential, legal. It was an updated shareholder agreement for Carter Enterprises. Vivian had been forced to resign from the board that morning, and in her place, a new voting member had been installed. Me. I blinked at the screen. She appointed you herself, Ambrose said. It was part of a desperate deal to avoid criminal charges. The board gave her a choice: step down quietly or get dragged out. And she chose me? You were the only name she could submit that the investors wouldn't object to. I stared at the document. From outsider to power holder, Vivian Carter had made me part of the empire she tried to keep me out of. 3 weeks after I was appointed to the board of Carter Enterprises, I walked into the same boardroom where Vivian once ruled like a monarch. She wasn't there anymore. Her name had been scrubbed from the wall plaque, her portrait taken down from the gallery. Even her private parking spot had been reassigned. And as petty as it sounds, watching that space be repainted was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Vivian Carter had been erased by the very machine she built, and replaced by the daughter of the woman she tried to destroy. But this story wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. The company was a mess beneath the surface. The kind of mess only someone who'd been trampled by its culture could truly recognize. Nepotism, corruption, a toxic loyalty to legacy over ethics. So I started making changes. I reinstated the scholarships Vivian had cut to streamline PR costs. I ended backdoor deals with vendors her family friends controlled. And I opened an investigation into multiple contracts she had signed under shell companies, ensuring the consequences wouldn't just stop at resignation. But as her influence crumbled, Vivian wasn't silent. She tried to go to the media, spinning a new narrative, that I was a manipulative outsider, seducing her brother for power, that Ambrose had fed her false documents, that the entire board had been hijacked. The headlines came fast, but they didn't stick. Because for once, the truth was louder. And then came the court summons, a class action lawsuit filed by former employees whose pensions had been funneled into phantom investments. Investments linked to, you guessed it, Vivian's offshore accounts. It was no longer a family drama. It was criminal. She was arrested on a rainy Thursday morning. The footage of her being led into a black SUV in cuffs ran on every major news outlet. And in that moment, I didn't feel rage or victory. I felt closure. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The real twist came the day I received a letter, not an email. A letter. Handwritten. Slanted cursive. The paper smelled faintly of roses and desperation. Natalie, you've taken everything from me, but you'll never understand what it's like to carry a name like Carter. You didn't grow up with the weight of perfection on your shoulders. You didn't have to fight for a seat at the table. You were handed sympathy. I earned my crown, even if they tore it off my head. But let me leave you with one truth. Logan still loves you. And one day, you'll realize that love is more powerful than pride. Unless, of course, you've already become me. V. I read it twice. Then I burned it. Because Vivian was wrong. I hadn't become her. I hadn't used power to punish. I used it to protect. I didn't build my name on the backs of others. I carried the weight of those she crushed. And as for Logan, love without courage is just a shadow of what it could be. He called a few times after the arrest, sent flowers, left a voicemail telling me he missed me and wanted to start fresh. But I didn't reply, because I didn't need fresh. I needed free. Last week, I stood in front of a crowd of new interns at Carter Enterprises, diverse, driven, and nothing like the elite clones Vivian used to hire. I told them my story, not the headlines, the truth. I told them how I went from being invisible to taking a seat at the very table where they said I didn't belong. And when I finished, one of the interns asked me, if you could say one thing to the old you, the version still waiting for approval at the edge of those family brunches, what would it be? I didn't even blink. I'd say, stop waiting for someone to choose you. You already belong. You just have to decide you're done asking for permission. That silence I once feared, now it's the space I fill, with my voice, my name, and my rules. Comment the number 3 if you think Vivian finally got what she deserved. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next jaw-dropping drama.